Welcome to the video, Cultivating Therapist Charisma, Seeking Numinous Experiences. My name is Dr. Stephen Bacon. I'm a clinical psychologist in Santa Barbara, California, and I've spent the past decade writing books and researching exactly how psychotherapy works. Therapist Charisma. Common factors theory has long recognized that positive therapist factors, for example, persuasiveness, verbal fluency, interpersonal skills, alliance bond capacity, hopefulness, and emotional expressiveness, are correlated with enhanced outcomes. These factors, which can be grouped under the title of therapist charisma, become exponentially more important because of the research results. When one accepts that there is no inherent power in techniques, the remaining factors that influence outcome are the capacity and motivation of the client and the charisma of the therapist. Historically, developing therapist charisma in a world where techniques have inherent power is deprioritized. When all the power resides in the techniques, therapists are merely required to be competent diagnosticians and interventionists, much like medical doctors. In a post-research world, in a world where psychotherapy operates in constructed reality, therapist charisma is central to outcome, and the development of this charisma is a high priority. Charisma defined. Etymologically, charisma is associated with gift of grace or favor freely given. In the Christian tradition, it refers to one who is touched by spirit. In modern usage, it is connected to influence, magnetism, and persuasiveness. Unfortunately, it is also associated with rich, powerful, and famous individuals and can be connected to manipulation and inappropriate use of personal power. That is not the association referenced here. Charisma includes the positive therapist common factors discussed above. It specifically includes Apollonian wisdom, expertise in the cultural values, contingencies, and principles of a given culture, and it also includes Dionysian wisdom, wisdom based on constructionism, deconstructionism, and the discernment between the real and the unreal. It includes all the factors connected to caring, humbleness, egolessness, listening, compassion, and kindness. Key individuals. Charisma can be operationalized via the concept of the key individual. More specifically, the process of programming humans into a certain set of culturally sanctioned beliefs requires guidance from family members and reinforcement from general social encounters. These relationships and experiences teach one to see the world in the same way as other members of the culture. In addition, however, there are certain key individuals, seen as charismatic and powerful, who are granted special authority to define constructed reality and our role in it. Given the fluidity of reality, such individuals, mentors, teachers, leaders, have strong powers. They can alter our realities, identities, or prospects with a word or a gesture. In constructed reality, this is a literal capacity, not a metaphoric one. The ability of the client to see the therapist as a key individual defines the level of the therapist's charisma. Charisma and the hierarchy problem. There are a number of psychotherapeutic schools, particularly postmodern ones such as narrative therapy and collaborative therapy, that are adverse to a hierarchical therapist-client relationship, citing numerous examples where such relationships led to client damage, particularly in liminal populations. For example, LGBTQ, racial groups, and gender issues. Their solution is to aspire to flat, egalitarian therapeutic relationships. Since charisma has a hierarchical flavor, such schools would see it as potentially problematic. Insisting that all relationships be as flat as possible, however, turns hierarchy into the form of a technique, something that is decided a priori, something that happens to all clients regardless of their needs. In this sense, the flat recommendation violates both the research about techniques and the centrality of client fit. Guilford and others have pointed out that the fact that clients pay therapists makes some level of hierarchy inevitable. Moreover, the client is coming into therapy with a certain amount of suffering. The initial contract is to relieve that suffering. The concept that the therapist can help resolve the client dilemma is also inherently hierarchical. As a result, Guilford and others recommend recognizing and working with the hierarchy consciously versus hoping that simple tools, such as phrasing suggestions as questions, will minimize it. At the end of the day, virtually no client wishes to work with a therapist that they believe is less conscious or mature than themselves. Previous videos have emphasized the importance of enfranchising the client and sharing power whenever possible. This video focuses on reassuring the client that the therapist can offer significant hope and help. Put another way, the therapist must convince the client that they have something to offer. The historical exclusion of charisma. As part of the post-Enlightenment triumph of rationality and the medical model, there's been a sustained effort to separate the character or qualities of the healer from the tools of healing. In the following quote, Briggle and Frodeman point out how this separation has played out in the modern research university. Quote, there's another layer to this story. The act of purification accompanying the creation of the modern research university was not just about differentiating realms of knowledge. It was also about divorcing knowledge from virtue. Though it seems foreign to us now, before purification, the philosopher and natural philosopher was assumed to be morally superior to other sorts of people. The 18th century thinker Joseph Priestley wrote, "A philosopher ought to be something greater and better than another man." Philosophy, understood as the love of wisdom, was seen as a vocation, like the priesthood. It required significant moral virtues. Foremost among those were integrity and selflessness, and the pursuit of wisdom, in turn, further inculcated those virtues. The study of philosophy elevated those who pursued it. Knowing and being good were intimately linked. It was widely understood that the point of philosophy was to become good rather than simply to collect or produce knowledge. This quote, although it literally refers to philosophers, parallels the charisma minimization process in psychotherapy. Charisma is incompatible with science. Science locates power in evidence-based techniques. Constructionism joins older traditions, like the virtuous philosopher above, who finds power in the character and experience of the healer. The charisma tradition in shamanism. Quote, he does not become a shaman simply by willing it, for it is not the shaman who summons up the spirits, but they, the supernatural beings who choose him. Adolescence typically marks the point when the spirits begin to take an overt role in the shaman's life, although variations in the age of onset do occur. The spirits may cause the chosen one to fall into hysterics, to faint repeatedly, to have visions, or to have similar symptoms, with these events sometimes persisting for weeks. Eventually, in a vision or dream, the being or beings who have chosen the shaman appear and announce their intentions. This call is necessary for the shaman to acquire his powers. Close quote. The shamanic healing tradition argues that becoming a shaman requires knowing something, but it also includes certain prerequisite experiences that document or enhance the personal power of the healer. This concept of vocation, where the healer is chosen as well as being a chooser, is central to shamanism. It argues that the potential healer needs to seek experiences where healing power is bestowed. Professions requiring charismatic experience. At present, there continue to be many modern professions that require experience as an entry-level requirement. For example, military leadership requires combat experience, and spiritual leadership requires mystical experience. Doctors are especially respected because of their associations with death and mortality. Tom Wolfe wrote a book entitled The Right Stuff. It was specifically about test pilots and astronauts, but the title implied something bigger, something more general. Wolfe argued that in many high-demand professions, for example, commercial diving, fishing, or firefighting, no one is fully recognized as a member without the necessary qualifying experiences. We see individuals who've gone through such experiences as different, important, special, transformed. Poetically speaking, such individuals have traveled to sacred space, while the rest of us live in secular space. Their journeys to that dimension have marked them as special, unique, respectable. Exposure to them, closeness to them, might allow some of the specialness to rub off. Clearly, such people have importance. They are listened to. We are all predisposed to follow their guidance. Even the humble ones, who are reticent in terms of sharing their experience, or who are particularly self-effacing, know inside themselves that these experiences have changed them. This gives them a quiet self-confidence that can't be earned any other way. Psychotherapists seeking charismatic experience. While such experiences can never be quantified and literally required, they can be encouraged and taken into account in applications for graduate training. If we are looking for ways to improve outcomes, we would be silly to abandon the primary way that healers have been respected and chosen throughout history and across cultures. Mircea Eliade went to great lengths to discuss the way in which humans define the boundaries between sacred and profane experience. Quote, "Man becomes aware of the sacred because it manifests itself, shows itself, as something wholly different from the profane. To designate the active manifestation of the sacred, we have proposed the term hierophany. It is a fitting term because does not imply anything further. It expresses no more than is implicit in its etymological content, i.e., that something sacred shows itself to us. In each case, we are confronted by the same mysterious act, the manifestation of something of a wholly different order, a reality that does not belong to our world, and objects that are an integral part of our natural profane world." Eliade's basic argument is that humans implicitly divide the world into profane space and sacred space. And sacred space has a particular utility in terms of providing meaning and purpose. Quote, "The experience of sacred space makes possible the founding of the world. Where the sacred manifests itself in space, the real unveils itself, the world comes into existence." The authentic calling. Human beings can visit sacred space and have challenging and transformatory experiences. Success with such experiences is not guaranteed. When successful, they can return to secular space with the literal symbol of their experience, such as a cross or talisman, but more often they return with wisdom and or an open heart. Put in the most prosaic terms, these sorts of experiences might get one invited to the local Rotary Club to give an inspirational talk. The speaker is not only invited because they have done something interesting, the best speakers are invited because it is assumed that their experience, whether climbing mountains, documenting a war, or working to stop an epidemic, has somehow transformed the speaker, made them charismatic, touched by grace. For our purposes, participation in these experiences inside of sacred space has the potential to transform the individual. They come back to the world a different person. These experiences are the modern equivalent of the vision quest of the traditional shaman. We can use the term numinous to describe these experiences. Even if a client never hears the details, the therapist who has been there knows that they have a kind of authenticity that arises from encounters with existential meaning and purpose. Because these experiences validate the sense of having a calling, therapists who participate in them often report feeling chosen. They have a sense of external validation. Who has the right to be a healer and to guide others? Historically, healers have that right bestowed by a sacred space experience. When the research results and the characteristics of constructed reality have removed the role of expert from the therapist, there's a strong need to replace this expertise with a sense of having a validated calling. Pragmatic charisma. There are an almost infinite variety of available charismatic experiences. Simple examples include experiences that are often associated with modern vision quests. For example, climbing Everest, working in an African orphanage, spending 6 months in a Buddhist meditation center in Southeast Asia. More subtle examples might include bringing an idealized and demanding consciousness to typical activities like having a relationship or raising children. Setting a goal of pure and egoless service in either of those roles can be transformative. Just as challenging and potentially just as useful might be the less traditional idea of pushing erotic limits in a romantic relationship. Whatever moves one beyond secular and prosaic limits and opens the door to living in an idealized, sacred world is what is important. Second, if we are to ask clients to shift realities, we need to know inside ourselves that we have been through our own version of such transformations. Charisma-enhancing experiences that challenge our own assumptions, living in other cultures, extended spiritual retreats, psychedelic drug quests, can be particularly useful. Spending months or even years in gathering such experiences is typically more available to the young, given that they have relatively few limits from family or work that might inhibit dedicating the time. However, those who are familiar with journeys to sacred space are loath to give them up simply because they are older and more responsible. Instead, they sustain these commitments through smaller experiences, pilgrimages, and retreats, or through doing conventional activities with unconventional attitudes. Conclusion: healing and ego. There are solid reasons that healers across cultures and historical periods have been required to seek numinous experiences, the sense of a calling, or the feeling of being chosen. The medical model attempts to dispense with these ancient requirements, hoping that they can be replaced with the inherent power of techniques. With the end of that hope, the old guidance comes back into force. Healers heal from their own experiences and power, and yet, paradoxically, they are required to understand, in a state of egolessness, that real healing comes through them from beyond them. This ancient dynamic stretches back to the beginnings of the healing tradition. Paradoxically, the modern version of this same dynamic is as innovative and provocative as the latest social media influencer. Quote, "When the healer thinks he is healing, his power is as small as a drop. When he thinks God is healing, and when owing to this thought his own self is forgotten, and he is only conscious of the self of God, then his power becomes as large as the ocean." Hazrat Inayat Khan.